award-winning. He is amazing. He is an author and a writer and the best guy around. David Cay Johnston with a T. Good morning to you.
Good morning, Tim.
You would think that I would have gotten it right, but
that's all right. From nice and warm Western New York.
Oh,
unlike my home state of California, the weather has been very nice this winter.
Oh, wow. Okay. I wanted to ask you about these pictures last time I had you on, and I didn't get a chance to, but there's some really cool art right behind you, like a hand-drawn portraits of, I'm assuming that's you and your wife?
It is, and the one to my wife was a gift from a friend, and we commissioned the other. David Coates did this kind of graphic art portraits for Entertainment Weekly magazine for years and years and years. Of course, that magazine no longer is around in print, but he lives here, and we have a lot of the art in our home. Not all of it, but a lot of it is from artists here in Western New York, because there's a very large arts and artisan community. I used to be a trustee of a fine arts school called Visual Studies Workshop. Years earlier, one of my children got her master's degree at that institution, founded by a famous photographer named Nathan Lyons. And anyway, yeah, they were. We liked the one my wife got, so we commissioned the other one. And they weren't expensive. So
they're really special. They're really cool. I like them.
Yeah, I think hers is a lot better than mine. Beards don't work quite so well.
Well, I like how it seems like often you're in a different spot in the house. And so I really get to see like your whole environment. It's been great.
Yeah. There's a lot of places I can't be in my house because of the nature of it. We live in a house designed by an architect who was a fan of Frank Lloyd Wright. And it has the beauty of such a home without the terrible expense if you buy a Frank Lloyd Wright home. It also has every single flaw that Frank Lloyd Wright home. Anyway, you wanted to talk about other things more significant.
I mean, how can we not talk about Trump? Because today was supposed to be the big day where he said on Truth Social, as if anyone pays attention to that, but I guess we did, that he was going to be arrested today. And please come out in the street and protest and let's get let's tell him I shouldn't be behind bars. But now they've got the barricades all over New York. Trump Tower's barricaded off because of the likelihood of protest. The Manhattan court is barricaded off. And now it looks like maybe he won't be arrested today after all. What are your thoughts on all this?
Well, Donald, had no notice that he was going to be indicted or anything else. He read some news reports that his indictment could be as early as Monday. And his longtime lawyer and advisor, Bob Costello, former federal prosecutor, was called as a witness on his behalf before the grand jury. New York has an unusual grand jury law. It's not like California law. If you are called subpoenaed to appear before a grand jury, you cannot be prosecuted for anything you tell the grand jury about. You get transactional immunity right there. In a place like California, that's not true. In the federal government, it's not true. In fact, I don't know anywhere that that's the case except New York. You want to know when this is going to happen. When does Trump's jet, or he has two of them, when does his jet leave Palm Beach, Florida airport?
That's what I was thinking. I mean, here's a guy with the means to get away, right?
Well, I don't. Donald, first of all, here's why he'll surrender and behave on this level. He will be released on his own recognizance, as I think he should be. He shouldn't be treated differently than anybody else.
Sure.
For the kind of crime he was accused of, provided he shows up in court, he does what he's supposed to do. The worst thing Donald could do is to say, I'm going to fight extradition, because eventually he will be extradited and a judge will say, well, you're going to sit in Rikers Island.
Yeah.
So that shouldn't surprise people. But look, Trump is going to do his very best to try and get his supporters to engage in a level of violence that he thinks will intimidate the prosecutors. It's not going to. It is not going to. He may cost the New York taxpayers a fortune in overtime. An order went out last night that every single New York police officer who is not undercover, is to show up and work today in uniforms, or as it's known, in the bag.
Oh.
And that suggests that they are concerned they might have an all hands on situation. One Police Plaza is not very far from the Manhattan County Courthouse, New York County Courthouse. But I'll be surprised if there's a lot of violence. Look at what's happened to the 940 people arrested so far over January 6th. Long jail sentences for the people who committed violence as opposed to just came into the building and stood around while others committed violence. Here's the question, at least a rational person would ask themselves: am I willing to give up my life, my family, my career, my whatever assets I've managed to attain so that I can go commit violence on behalf of this man? And indeed, one of the leaders of the Oath Keepers denounced Donald Trump yesterday and said, we went all out for him, and what did he do for us? Gee, I'm just shocked. Donald Trump treats loyalty as a one-way street.
Big surprise there. He always has.
Yeah.
Now they're just catching on. Donald Trump's always been about Donald Trump. No one
ever went broke, Kim, underestimating the stupidity of
American people. I was talking to a former U.S. attorney, David Cay yesterday on the show, and he was saying that he felt any charges against Trump should have been brought at the federal level, and that state charges against a former president really set a bad precedent. I wonder what your thinking is on that.
Yeah, the underlying argument to what Mr. Cass said is any local prosecutor there are 3,300 counties, or what are called county equivalents, around the country. Any one of them could start filing charges against the president to harass the president. We have never seen that happen. And if it does, that's where courts can intervene. This is by far not, assuming the charge, remember, we don't know what the grand jury's true bill is going to say. But assuming the indictment is about the hush money to Stormy Daniels, which would be a misdemeanor by itself, and made a felony because of other crimes to cover it up. That's how this law works in New York. Falsify business records, that's the underlying charge, and then cover up or advance the crime doing other crimes, which is going to almost always be the case. Now it's a felony. Michael Cohen went to prison for this. And if Michael Cohen can go to prison for acting as Donald Trump's agent, then I don't see why Donald Trump can't. The more serious charges, without a doubt, are federal charges, particularly over the stolen national security documents, which I'm interpreting a little bit here, but just tiny amount, are believed to have included the names, the identities of American undercover agents and American assets. An American asset would be somebody in the Kremlin who is talking to us sotto voce on the side about what Putin is doing.
Yeah. If
it were to come out in a federal trial that any one of those people was killed or attacked, I think it would be sort of game over for Trump, for everybody who believes it. And the federal charges are the most important, but you don't get a free ride because you're president or we're president, especially if we are going to try and move toward the promise of our society of equal justice under law. And apparently the Atlanta case, Fulton County, from the special grand juror's comments to the Atlantic Journal-Constitution, which, by the way, they're totally free to make. The judge has made it very clear. Georgia law,
gag order.
There's no gag order. They can talk about everything except a handful of items. And they told the Atlanta newspaper, oh man, this is a much more massive case than you have any idea of. That we now know there's more than just the one taped telephone call where Trump threatened Brad Raffensperger, the Republican who was the head of state elections. And
there's more?
There's the mother and the daughter who worked in the election, you may recall, who had death threats, people pounding on the door saying they're going to kill them. But apparently there was more effort than we know about to illegally overturn that election. So I understand the federal prosecutor's point. Glenn Kirshner, when I was on MSNBC a night or two ago, made the same point. And I think that, yes, the big charge is going to be the federal one, but I don't see a reason to give Trump a walk on the crimes he committed in New York. And as I said, we don't know exactly what that grand jury indictment is going to say. It might have a state RICO charge, which is something I've argued for a long time, and what the prosecutors who quit, Mark Pomerantz and Kerry Dunn, were working to bring when Alvin Bragg, the newly elected DA, said, I don't think you got the case. There may be a tax charge. There may be a suborning perjury charge. I'd say there's a pretty good chance of that. And all of this, Kim, means that Trump faces a real tough question. Does he want to invoke his right to a speedy trial? He can go to trial in 2 months. Or does he want to risk that a judge sets the trial next year, which would be likely if he tries to drag it out? And you don't have to attend your own trial as a defendant unless you're in custody. But it would certainly make difficult his running for president if he's facing a trial. And the trials would not occur on the same dates. The judges absolutely would see to it that they don't overlap. The risk for Trump is that if he seeks a speedy trial, which I doubt he will do, he would be running perhaps as a convicted felon. And I always use, that it's collateral and unnecessary, or should be, to say convicted felon. But every time I write felon, I get people who write and say, does that mean he's been convicted? So
really?
Yeah.
That's just the level of charges. That has nothing to do with.
You wouldn't believe how many Americans do not understand how a bill gets through Congress because they slept through junior high school civics. We just saw a Republican congresswoman from central New York, so 60, 80, 100 miles from where I live, give an interview to Newsmax, and she's a former lawyer and a former judge, in which she essentially said, the New York case will be nothing because Trump will refuse to participate. That's not how the criminal justice system works. Doesn't matter. So let's say, bank robbery charge, I'm not going to go to the courthouse. Not the way it works.
No.
How can a former lawyer and judge say that? Well, because there's a whole contingent of people out there who want to hear that.
Yeah. They want to hear that. The Georgia prosecutors, you had just brought up the Georgia case. Apparently, the charges they're considering are racketeering and conspiracy charges in this investigation to overturn the 2020 loss. So, I mean, that doesn't seem like enough to me. Racketeering and conspiracy. I kind of want something else.
Well,
like election tampering, or like a specific election charge about, you tried to usurp the will of the American people charge. I want something with teeth.
Yeah, I'm not deeply informed on Georgia law.
That's not a charge? No.
I'm very aware of New York State RICO law and the federal law, and I know the former Justice Department official and legal scholar Robert Blakey, who came up with this idea. But actually, a RICO charge makes a great deal of sense. A RICO charge is an enterprise, and an enterprise can be a business, or it can be activities you all took jointly, which appears to be a legitimate political or business action, but in fact, it's a criminal enterprise posing as legitimate. Mm-hmm. And that allows you to bring in a kitchen sink of material, and including the menacing of Brad Raffensperger, where Trump threatened him. He didn't say, I'm going to go break your legs. That's not how Trump operates. He said, I'm going to make your life impossible.
But then all the rest of the Trump, people, the supporters, threatened their lives and the lives of their family. There was serious intimidation.
Right. And a RICO charge specifically allows you to pursue those issues, at least New York and federal law. And I'm sure the Georgia law is similarly framed.
What does RICO stand for?
Racketeering, influenced, corrupt organization. It was originally thought of as a way to go after the mafia. I mean, the problem with early prosecutions of the mafia was that all these guys had businesses, and they would all say, I'm a businessman. Joe Bonanno, the head of one of the five families, in his autobiography, which was a response to Gates Elise's book, Honor Thy Father, that laid out his criminal career. I remember I reviewed this for the LA Times when it came out, and there's a line where he says, the newspapers, they say that I deal in heroin and other drugs. I've never even seen heroin. In which I wrote, no doubt true. And the chairman of the board of Exxon doesn't pump gasoline either. And the RICO laws have been successful. In fact, in the most famous RICO case of all, one of the charges involved Donald Trump, one of Donald Trump's apartment buildings in New York on East 61st Street, and mob concrete.
Were RICO charges ever even brought up or considered in this case?
Well, this was in New York. That's what.
No, but I mean in the Trump case.
In that case, he wasn't the person who was pursued. It was the mobsters who were pursued.
I'm talking about what's going on now with the election, how you were talking about RICO charges would be applicable.
Well, in New York, that's what Mark Pomerantz and Kerry Dunn, the very experienced prosecutors, Pomerantz is hands down the authority on RICO in America. There's nobody in his league. That was the case they were trying to bring, and Alvin Bragg, when he became DA, shut it down. Mm-hmm. And Pomerantz, whom I've talked to, and who wrote a book, sort of basically says, I don't think I properly sold and explained to Bragg what we were doing. When I was teaching my class last night, it was on to my law students. It was about tax law. And before I walked into the class, the last thing I thought to myself was, don't start out with a string. Start out with a big umbrella of what you're going to go through, and make sure that they have a solid, this is the ballpark that we are in, to mix metaphors. Whereas Pomerantz sort of thinks that what he did was he just walked up to the plate and hit the ball without explaining the rules of baseball to Bragg. But I to this day believe that a RICO charge against Trump and the Trump organization and his three oldest children and Jared Kushner is absolutely the best way to go. But as again, prosecutors, old saying among prosecutors, you don't bring the case you want to bring, you bring the case you know you will win.
Do you think there will be major protests on the street should he be arrested?
That's going to be the big test, because if there aren't, that tells you that Donald Trump is already shriveled to insignificance.
Crickets.
Over, and over this underlying case called, an affair with Stormy Daniels. According to Stormy Daniels, this affair lasted about 48 seconds. If Donald can't turn out huge crowds, this is not good for him at all. And this is New York City. Donald Trump is reviled in New York City. I mean, he got 30% of the vote or so in Manhattan, but absolutely reviled widely in Manhattan. And one of the reasons he got this free ride in the 2016 election that I started trying to educate my peers about in 2015 was, as one of my former editors of the New York Times said to me, when I said, you guys need to write about Donald's involvement with the cocaine trafficker for whom he did just inexplicable and extraordinary favors unless they were in business together, and other crimes. And he said, David, everybody knows that he's a crook. And I said, no, everybody in Manhattan knows that.
Right.
People in Keokuk, Iowa, and West Texas think he's a business genius, hero of the popular man and woman.
But there were stories after stories about, before he was elected, about him, screwing people out of money. The people performed work, and then he would turn around and say, you know what? I'm not going to pay you for that. I'm going to pay you a fourth of what I agreed to pay you.
I was the person who wrote a lot of those.
I mean, we knew he was a crook. The information was readily available,
but we really didn't. And you go read the New York Times is the news source in America. Every TV producer, every radio news producer, every editor of a regional or local newspaper that has any ambitions gets up in the morning and the first thing they do is read the New York Times. And the Times ran a huge page one scrub, as we call it in the business, of Hillary Clinton. When Barack Obama ran, we scrubbed John McCain and Barack Obama. Was it, some people were claiming McCain a quisling when he was in the Hanoi Hilton, or was he a hero? Where was Barack Obama born? The New York Times sent a reporter to Indonesia who found his kindergarten playmates and documented that they went to kindergarten together. There was a big scrub of Hillary Clinton. There was no scrub of Donald Trump.
Why?
Look for it. Because this attitude, there's a famous New Yorker magazine cover by Steinberg that's the New York viewpoint of the world. And it starts off somewhere in Manhattan. And as soon as you get to the East River, it says New Jersey, the rest of the world.
Yeah.
Jennifer and I have hanging in our house a parody of that. That's the Los Angeles done the same way.
Yeah.
But there was this view by producers on TV and editors and at many news organizations that we all know who Donald Trump is. Yeah. They didn't appreciate, because these aren't the kind of folks who would watch the Apprentice and the Celebrity Apprentice, who he was. And by the way, anybody who knows business, and I taught at a graduate school of business for 8 years, anybody who knows business watching that show, as I went and watched some of them, would say to themselves, that's not how you run a successful business. He's making the most absurd judgments and saying things that are just, that's not how business works. It doesn't fit any theory of business, of leadership, of management. But why would anybody who's a factory worker, or a police officer have any idea of how business works at the top?
So it's that's all true, and yes, crappy business person, and it turned out that he was a crappy president as well. But I wonder, in this New York case, and we're running out of time. I'm so sorry. There were so many things I wanted to talk to you about, but this is so interesting. This New York case where Cohen went to jail for the whole hush money payment to Stormy Daniels and the cover up of it all. I guess the problem that I've read about is proving that Trump knew what Cohen was doing and intended and basically had the intent to cover all this up, or was it Cohen that did it all and he didn't know?
So that's going to be Trump's defense. Plus, Michael Cohen's a convicted perjurer, so he's a liar. Yeah. The answer to that is prosecutors put convicted murderers, co-conspirators, people have been convicted of serious charges involving selling our secrets to foreign governments on the witness stand all the time and get convictions. And in this case, you'd have to ask yourself, why would Michael Cohen go and take a loan on his own account to pay for Donald Trump? What would prompt you to do that? Secondly, they've got Alan Weiselberg, who directed the money, and Jeff Coney, who was called to the grand jury, so won't be charged, who was right under Weiselberg, who've testified about this. And so I don't think they're going to have any trouble showing that Donald Trump directed the payoff. They may get some success with some jurors by saying, well, this wasn't a violation of election laws of the state and federal government. This was an effort to hide this from his wife, Melania. If she is so naive that she thinks she had a faithful husband, I'm a girl. Right. Cohen's testimony can be supported by documents that they have and testimony from other parties. I think this is a real serious problem for Donald Trump. But if he were to get a hung jury, he's going to proclaim, see, I was innocent. If he gets convicted, well, this is the corrupt deep state, George Soros backed, all those jurors were paid to make this decision. I mean, he'll make all sorts of outrageous charges, none of which will do him any good when it comes to sentencing. Because one of the things judges pay attention to at sentencing is, are you contrite? And if you're actually innocent,
he'll never be contrite.
If you're actually innocent and say, I didn't kill my wife, I don't know who did, you guys don't believe me, but I didn't do it. That's one thing. But if you get up and say, yeah, you're not legitimate.
Yeah.
Oh, that's not smart at all.
It's not a good look. Yeah. But you can almost see that that's what he will do, because that's how he handled election losses, right? If I win, it shows everything's fine. Right. If I lose, it shows everything's broken. It's all about what I want to happen. If I win this case, it shows I was innocent all along. If I lose, it shows the American justice system is corrupt and all you people are the worst in the world. So it's a
relatively small minority of the population who buy this. And remember, the Republicans are a minority party who as a share of the population have been shrinking for some time. And it's within the Republican Party, Trump is basically supported by a minority of Republicans. He always is pointing to the Rasmussen poll, which is the least reliable political poll around. But he's not doing well. And so for Trump, you know, there are three things, Kim, you're likely to see happen going forward. Donald Trump gets the Republican nomination because a lot of people run and he's able to pick them off one by one as he did in 2016. Then you go to the general election, he will lose by a landslide in the popular vote. He might still get an electoral college win, especially with help from the Russians, the North Koreans, and the Saudis. Second, he is denied the Republican nomination, in which case he'll run as an independent. That will peel off enough Republican votes, even if he only got 3% of the votes, that the Democrats win. The third scenario is he realizes there'll be a humiliating defeat. And so he tells his voters, the whole system's corrupt, don't vote, which assures the Democrats will win. I mean,
so no matter how we cut it, we're doing okay.
Yeah, I mean, the Democrats, who have a long history of snatching victory from, snatching defeat from the jaws of victory,
right,
can mess this up. But if they keep their powder dry, pay attention, behave reasonably, and keep pointing to 12 million jobs in 2 years when Trump created roughly 6 million in 3, because I'm not going to count the pandemic against him, even though you could reasonably do that. I mean, Trump had a slower job growth additions than Obama once the Great Recession ended. He was 3% below Trump, and then we've seen this continuing great growth under Biden of jobs and wages rising, which is what the Fed's trying to stop with increased interest rates. So Donald, a whole bunch of tough questions for him. When do you go to trial? Even if he's convicted, he can run for president. Eugene V. Debs ran for president on the socialist ticket in 1920. He was in federal prison in Atlanta because he'd been convicted of sedition during World War I. He got 900,000 votes, or 3.4% of the total. The winner of that election, Calvin Coolidge, commuted his sentence shortly after taking office, by the way. So,
sedition, that's a charge I'm looking for. Sedition. Yeah.
Well, I hope, but don't.
David Cay Johnston, you are amazing and awesome. I am so grateful to you for coming on the show, even though Mark's not here. dcreports.org. You've got some great articles up there. Report, it was singular. dcreport.org. Got to get the facts straight. You can check it out. You've got a great article about some information to come out of the Reagan era that we may not have known before, which was a fascinating report.
I think we all sort of figured it had to be true, but we now have the smoking gun proof.
Oh. Well, we will see you hopefully back here next week. And I look forward to it. Thank you for the great conversation.
Hi, it's Mark, and I thought that was great. Hit the notification bell. You'll know whenever there's a new video being dropped, and please subscribe to our channel to help us save the universe.